spend most of my money on gas.
I spend my money on school, books, and a car payment.
Well, I just got a job, so I'm going to be spending it on a new phone that I have to pay for, and going out with friends usually, and sometimes food and stuff like that.
I spend a lot of it on food and gas and clothing and a lot of things I don't need. Just stuff.
Cash flow plans do not work because you leave things out. That's why we're going to go through a whole budgeting system here because it's a checklist of little things that sometimes will sneak up on you and you forget about. You forget about soccer pictures. You know, you forget that cars break down, car repairs. You forget about these things. And if you go through a little checklist, you'll go, oh, that. And then when you start adding it up, you get a more realistic picture. When your budget is not realistic, when it's just a wet finger in the air, then that's when you have crashes in your budget and you're going to end up with a lot more emergency budget committee meetings. Cash flow plans don't work if you overcomplicate your plan. If the nerd goes into steroid overdrive and the budget is 66 pages long and it takes a master's degree in business, an MBA, to understand your budget, no one's going to live on that in our busy culture, our go-go culture. You're not going to do that. You have to keep your life simple enough in this busy world with the budgeting so that you actually do it. That's the trick. Because that's the other reason they don't work, is people don't do a budget. You see, a budget won't work if you don't do a budget. This is not hard. And we need to do a different budget every month. We're going to start and spend this coming month's money on paper before the month begins. Every month, do a different set of forms. Forever. Now, eventually you'll get to where the kinks are worked out and it'll be pretty smooth, and most of that is repetition. But for the first few months of doing this, for the practice and to build the muscle in your character, do the details. Do lots and lots and lots of little details for those 3 months in particular while you're in Financial Peace University. So do the budget. And then a budget won't really work if you don't actually live on it. So you can do it and it's all theory and you didn't get anywhere. You actually have to live on the budget. On paper, on purpose, you write it all out, you got a game plan with your spouse, you pinky swear and spit shake, the nerd and the free spirit are together, we're walking forward, and then you just go do something that had nothing to do with what was written down. You actually have to do what you wrote down. You can't spend any money ever again except what you wrote down. And if you don't like what you wrote down, you know whose fault that is? Yours. So change it. If you want to change it, it's yours. Change it. But change it if you're married with your spouse. Because if you go home and go, honey, look what I did. That's not the rules. Okay? We're going to do this together. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove much of the management by crisis from your finances. If you're going through this class right now and you are struggling with money, things are really tight. Maybe you're even behind on some bills and you just really don't know what to do. What you've got to do first is you have to establish what we call your 4 walls around your house. You have to put up the 4 walls of your home. Take care of your own household first. Before you do anything, do food. Then do shelter. And then do utilities. And then do clothing and transportation. Food, shelter, clothing, transportation, utilities. Before you do anything. About 20-25% of the people that come into our offices for counseling or meet with one of our counselors across the nation that we've trained, about a fourth of them come in and they're current on MasterCard or the student loan and behind on their house. Is that backwards? Say yes. Yes. If you're going to be behind on something, let MasterCard squeal like a pig. All right? But be current on the house. Never get behind on your house while you pay some other goober somewhere. Never let your lights get cut off while you pay some other goober somewhere. You've got to keep this stuff in perspective and set priorities when you're in crisis. Now, what Sharon and I did and what we teach people to do is, if you're in crisis, of course, you have to assess the situation. What are we going to do to earn some more income? What are we going to sell so that we can get this thing to balance? But in the meantime, we're doing a budget and we're going to spend that money on paper until the money runs out, and we draw a line where the money runs out. When the money runs out, everybody below that line that month doesn't get paid. There's not enough money. I wanted to pay them, but I didn't have the money to pay them. And I'm going to decide on purpose, on paper, before all the yelling starts, who I'm going to pay. Now, I don't like that. I want to pay them all. But I'm going to draw that line there. And we had one guy call up as a credit card collector, and he's screaming at me on the phone, calling my mother names and all this stuff, and he's going on with all this stuff and all these threats, and we're going to take your firstborn, and, you know, and all these things. They come up with some bizarre stuff, don't they? And I said, well, listen, man, you know, I'd really like to pay you, but you're below the line. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, every month we do our bills, we lay everything out, and we draw a line where the money runs out, and we pay everybody above the line, and those that are below the line, we want to pay them, but we can't pay them this month, and this month you're below the line. And he said, you're kidding. I said, do I sound like I'm kidding? A little pause there. So how do I get above the line? You're nicer next time you call, you twit. Right? Gee. But you're beginning to get the idea how this deal works, right? Manage money. When you make your money behave, it stretches, it goes further. Because managed money has more muscle. It works harder. You know, when you manage your time, you get more out of your day. It's the exact same situation. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove many of the money fights from your marriage. It'll actually cause a money fight in your marriage if you're not careful the first time you sit down. I've warned you of that already, right? So be careful, nerds and free spirits. Do this gently. It's painful, this thing called change, okay? But long term, if you get together on where you spend your money, when you agree on your spending, you've agreed on your dreams, you've agreed on your fears, you've agreed on your goals, you've agreed on your priorities, you've agreed. You've created unity in your marriage. It's powerful stuff. It'll remove much of the guilt, shame, and fear that could be associated with buying something like food. I remember distinctly when we were broke, standing at the grocery store, writing a check, wondering if as I wrote that check, I was afraid I had just spent the money to pay the light bill with. Because we didn't have a plan. We were out of control. I didn't have it in my head, and I remember kind of sweating. You ever had that feeling where you kind of get a little bit of sweat on your upper lip, a little bit in your hand, when there's a little fear? Did anybody ever do that but me? Say yes? Yes. Yeah. And I remember writing that check and going, man, I had this feeling in me and I was really glad when I got home and we added it all up and I had the money to actually pay the electric bill and keep it on. You'll never have that feeling again when you have a written plan. Because you got the light money, and then you got the money for groceries, and everything is laid out there in order, and you know exactly what's going on. It gives you this sense of power, this sense of destiny with your money. I don't know of a single bank that will let you bounce a check and not charge you a fee. There are a lot of banks, however, that have student checking accounts, and they don't charge a monthly fee for opening those. So you can get by without being charged the monthly fee, but if you bounce checks, there's always going to be a penalty for that one. It will remove many of the overdrafts from your life, the bounced checks, the bounced debit card transactions. And that stuff, as we've already discovered, is very expensive, and it will also, of course, in the process of doing that, remove a lot of stress. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove overspending on a certain area. Just like the guy I talked about, he's overspending on restaurants, and so he didn't have the money, quote unquote, for retirement because of mismanagement. Not because he didn't make enough, but because he didn't have a plan. He didn't have it laid out. He hadn't given every dollar on paper, on purpose, a name. And if you don't tell your money what to do, as John Maxwell said, you will always wonder where it went.
Me, I probably spend on average about $75, $80 a week, if that.
I probably spend, probably only $30 a week.
A lot more than that.
Okay, I don't know. A lot of money because I like to shop. So it depends on whatever I shop.
I spend a good amount, probably about $30 to $40 a week, whether that's on food or CDs or going out with friends.
I'd probably have to say around $10.
The easiest and most powerful method is a zero-based plan using the envelope system. Now remember, there are no perfect months. This is going to take a while. And as you twist with this budget and you get it to working, as you find money in the budget, you put it on wherever you are on the baby step. Let's say you were on baby step 1. Baby step 1 is what? $1,000. We're going to get $1,000 for that. If we're working on that, then any money we can find in the budget, it goes straight to that. It doesn't go to pay extra on debt. It doesn't go to retirement. It doesn't go to anything until we get that $1,000 in place. So found money from the muscle of managed money, you'll dig up. You'll feel like you got a raise. You put it right on the baby step. Now, the zero-based plan is where every dollar has a name before the month begins. Income minus outgo equals exactly zero. So you have to figure out what you're going to make and then spend that on paper. And we're going to do that with a form system here in a few minutes. But that's the basic idea. Every dollar has a name on paper, on purpose, before the month begins, and in agreement with your spouse if you're married. If you're single, you have somebody else look over it to make sure you know where you're going and what's going on. So here's what I want you to do. I need everybody in here to stand up. There's a great old movie with Tom Cruise in it. Some of you have seen it. It's kind of famous, called Jerry Maguire. You ever seen that movie? You remember what Jerry Maguire said? Show me the money. That's a powerful statement, isn't it? You see, what I've discovered is in America, we work hard. There are a few lazy people in America, but by and large, people work hard, don't we? And it is a shame that a high percentage of Americans work like everything throughout their entire lives and retire waiting on the government to take care of them. That's pitiful. Instead, what we're talking about tonight is, what we're talking about in this lesson is that you take the money and you make it behave. When you make the money behave, you get something for your labor. You work too hard to retire broke. You work too hard to not be able to live like no one else so that later you can live like no one else. You ought to be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. But until you manage it, until you make the money behave, you will not win. And so this whole budgeting lesson is all about you saying to yourself and to your spouse and to each other over and over and over again for the rest of your life, that's what you're going to say. But you got to mean it. You remember Jerry was about to lose a client when he was yelling it. You remember the scene? He's about to lose a client. Things were bad. And he's going, man, you got to say it with feeling, brother. That's what he was saying to him. You remember that? He said, you got to yell it. You got to say it like you mean it. You ready? Show me money. You see, you work too hard to end up with nothing. Yell it again. Show me money. So we could just nickname this whole lesson the Jerry Maguire lesson. Because it's a budget where the budget is where you say over and over to yourself on paper in detail, and you say it with a spiritual change, an emotional change deep down inside of you when you yell it. One more time, hard. Show me money. That's how it works. Have a seat. Good job. Give yourselves a hand.